This episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast is brought to you by Nomadicare. Now, personally, I love Nomadicare. I've used Nomadicare, and I recommend the company to all new travelers. What Nomadicare does is it takes the fear out of getting set up with a bad recruiter, which is the biggest fear that you have jumping into this journey. So they sit down, they interview recruiters, they vet them, get them on a list, and then provide them to you as a free service, as a free recruiter matchmaking service in order to get you started on your journey. Now, usually you only get 2 recruiters going through Nomadicare, but being a listener of the show, you can get 3. So this is how it's going to work. You go to nomadicare.com/Dylan. You will get set up with 3 recruiters to be on your dream team, as well as a guide to get you started on your journey.
The second sponsor of the show is TravCon, the Travelers Conference. I'm super excited to announce them as a sponsor of the show. TravCon was there for me before I got started as a medical nomad, and now I'm actually involved with the planning of the event. So super aligned, super congruent. I've been promoting them before they were even a sponsor, and so I'm excited to have them on. So there are 3 main reasons that you should go to TravCon this year. Number 1, value. This is the cheapest conference to go to as a medical professional, and also the only place that I've ever felt like royalty when you're walking in and all these staffing agencies and all these recruiters want to talk to you, and you're bumping elbows with these travelers and they're interested about your story, about where you're coming from and what you're doing, and it's overall just a really good feel-good event. Number 2 is education and growth. So this conference was founded on the realization that there's a lot to know to be a medical traveler, to be a medical nomad. And so this is where you go to get the most updated tax information. This is where you go for those really niche specific questions on what's it like to travel in an RV and what's it like to travel to Hawaii. And then third, community. This is where a lot of my traveler friends that are very near and dear to my heart right now, this is where we met. So this is where the relationship sparked. It's also one of the only places that you get to go to and see the leaders and meet the leaders of the industry, both on the staffing agency side and on the traveler side, and also get to meet your recruiters face to face that you've been working with. So TravCon is always in September every year. TravCon is also always in Las Vegas. The link is going to be in the show notes for you to get your ticket. I'll be at TravCon. All my friends will be at TravCon. I hope to see you there.
Hey Nomads, this is Dylan coming at you from Southern Missouri. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I am your host, Dr. Dylan Collier, and today we are continuing our series on negotiations. And last series we kind of went over all the educational bits, the most important ones, the biggest parts that you can negotiate, and where to kind of like preferably move money, how to ask for time off, things like that. But today is going to be a little bit shorter, and the big theme of this podcast is to don't feel uncomfortable and always ask for more. If you can incorporate this into a habit with your contract negotiations of not just accepting the first number that comes out, just always asking for more, you can walk away with a little bit each time. Usually each recruiter has a window of kind of like the percentages they can work with. Maybe there's a couple numbers that they can move around on their end to where, if you wouldn't have asked, they wouldn't have been able to kind of put it that way. So maybe they have an internal rule, like, you can only do this if the traveler really wants it. So I do highly encourage everybody to ask. And I think there is a way to do it without coming off and without feeling as not so nice about it if you're really uncomfortable about talking for money, because us as empathetic caregivers, we really kind of shy away usually from these negotiations. It feels awkward, it feels weird, but this is a chance for you to grow and to be more comfortable with talking around money. And so definitely ask. The second part of this podcast is going to be, don't ask just once, ask multiple times. And so there was a book I was recently reading, and it was talking about this big selling empire, and they were looking at the salespersons that did the best. And so 30% of the lowest usually asked to close the sale once. So closing meaning like, do you want to buy this? And then they would say no. The next like percentile, maybe up to 50%, would stop after asking twice. Maybe 70% would stop after asking 3 times. And it kind of went all the way up until the top 1% asked an average of 7 times before they actually closed the sale. So I don't think this means that you should ask for more cash from your recruiter 7 times for every contract negotiation. But I do think you should ask it more than once. And I think there are several opportunities that kind of present itself in order to do that. So first rule, always ask for more. Second rule, ask multiple times. So when you're first given that pay breakdown before your contract, pay breakdowns are a really good way to avoid issues that come up later on. So one of my very first contracts, I was taking health insurance. I was quoted a number, but because I didn't really have a full pay breakdown, I didn't realize that the health insurance figure that they offered me, that was actually after my paycheck, after my pay. So I had this like take home pay of like whatever it was in the 1600s, and then the travel insurance or the health insurance was this other number, like $50 per week, whatever it might have been. I didn't realize that those numbers weren't together. It meant that $50 or whatever it was per week was going to be coming out of that number for the weekly contract. So if you have everything broken down ahead of time, you can really avoid all these like miscommunication errors. So I do think it's really good for you to ask for a pay breakdown before submitting to a job for every job. I don't always do this. Sometimes I just kind of look at, once I get really comfortable with a recruiter, I just ask for, what's the gross amount, what's the taxable hourly, what's the net, and then we can figure it out all out later. Because the recruiter I would work with would tell it to me over the phone, and I'm not very auditory. I need to see it, and so I need it in an email. And so if we're submitting to 3 to 5 positions at once, just a big verbal blah over the phone doesn't really make much to me. So I'd ask about kind of the big things and then move forward. So even though I do recommend everybody to get a pay breakdown at the beginning before you submit to a job, I'm not 100% on following that myself. So you can do what feels most comfortable. It doesn't take a lot of time for a recruiter to give you a pay breakdown. So if you do feel any resistance on this, it usually takes them like 5 minutes. So I wouldn't really use that as an excuse to not get a pay breakdown beforehand. If you're doing multiple and you're just comfortable with not necessarily getting a full pay breakdown, then that's fine. Do what you want, but just know that the pay breakdowns at the beginning of a contract can prevent a lot of the miscommunications that come on later. And usually, if there are some miscommunications, you don't really feel the best about it, and it'll just save you headaches down the road. Similar to me in my situation of not knowing that health insurance wasn't coming out of that big figure for me, that it was to be subtractive. And so that was, $50 less a week or whatever it might have been for health insurance. But still, like, that was something that I found out after I'd already accepted the position. So at the beginning, when you first hear about this job, you're like, well, what are they making? Or what is the offer? And they come forward and they tell you an amount. Then you can ask, is there any wiggle room? And just ask, is that the best offer? Can we do any higher than that? And just kind of like see what happens. And that's the first time that you get to ask. And so you can ask that in a way to where it's not, like really aggressive or really frictional. It's just asking if is there any wiggle room for them to go up. And sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes they gave you the best that they could, and that's awesome. Sometimes maybe it's $1 or $2 higher or something like that. Maybe they were able to shift something around. Again, it's because you asked. And so it's a really good habit. If you are taking the pay breakdown, you get to review it all, kind of like negotiate where money is going at that point. If you're just getting the gross and the net amount, kind of the amount after taxes, in your taxable hourly, you can kind of say, okay, so is there any more wiggle room just to increase the net. So the amount after taxes, and maybe they can do something on their side. And so that's the way to handle it. So then after that point, you go into the interview, take the interview, and then after that, congrats, you got offered the job. Something will always come up during the interview that you weren't quite expecting. So maybe if you're a therapist, you might be the only therapist there. If they were talking about orientation, maybe it's like very, very short orientation. Maybe it's a new piece of equipment that you haven't worked with before. Something's going to stand out. And so when that does happen, you can always say like, hey, this actually came up during the interview. Is there any way that I could get a little bit more compensation? I feel like it's going to take me more time, and I feel really comfortable if I was able to get a little bit more compensation for this. If you go this route, you don't ever want to take an interview and then not take the job because it wasn't enough pay, because you already agreed to the amount at the beginning, and you can ruin a trust with a recruiter by not taking it after the interview. So if you accepted a rate and took the interview, you should be prepared to take it at that level. But again, we want to ask multiple times, and so you can always ask for more. And then if you happen to get a little bit more, maybe you're like, oh wow, like yeah, that you got this documentation system, whatever it might be, that's going to take you a little bit. Let me see, I got a little bit extra I can throw your way, blah blah blah. And so just knowing that there's another opportunity for you to ask for an increased amount. Now, going back to after the interview, say something comes up in the interview that you weren't expecting. Maybe your home health in some massive range, and you're like, I am not doing that. You can always not accept a job for something that pops up in the interview, but don't not accept a job because of the amount that you agreed to in order to interview. If you tell a recruiter that, that's going to feel really bad on their end. They're going to be like, why are you wasting my time? I could have submitted another traveler that I really, really adore that would have loved this job. But if something comes up during the interview, of course you can say no. But don't, if you say no because of the amount that you agreed to, it's not very congruent, and it can potentially kind of damper the relationship, and you don't want that. You want your recruiter to really want you as like their number one person, and somebody to think of when they see those like VIP contracts come up. And so those are the two easy areas to ask for more. Another way to be would be to kind of go through that pay breakdown either at the beginning or at the second, and kind of just walk through and say, oh, is there any way that we can go up higher here, or can we move it here? And use it, kind of approach it more as an educational piece. Asking, oh, well, how come it's this amount? How come it's not this amount? Things like that can be a way of indirectly asking rather than directly asking. So if you don't feel just comfortable about coming out and saying, hey, is there any wiggle room? Can we go up a little bit higher? That's another different way. The same thing when you're talking about overtime or extra time. You can always ask for more there as well. Maybe it's not. Maybe they have maxed you out as much as they can in the contract itself, but maybe there's a little bit more wiggle room within the overtime and the extra time. So you can ask about that specifically later on. So that's another opportunity to ask. And then always for extensions as well. It's best to pre-negotiate extensions up at the front. If you are anticipating on taking an extension, or even just having that conversation, what happens with an extension and all of a sudden they're not including that travel reimbursement in that second part, or that prorated amount, whatever it might be, then you might come across this, and a miscommunication could mean that you're not really satisfied with the extension amount when you're trying to extend. But even if you pre-negotiate, you do your 13 weeks, or you do your 6 weeks, and now you're starting to talk about, so are you going to stay? Are you going to go somewhere else? What are you looking at? You can always ask for more and just be like, you know what? It was okay here. I wasn't like really excited about it. And of course, you don't tell a facility this. They're always the best place that you worked at, just because that's how you make people feel good. And you can always ask for more when it comes up. And it's like, yeah, I know that we talked about this extension, but is there any wiggle room? Is there any way that we can go up for this extension? I'd be much more likely to stay for a little bit more cash, but otherwise I'm kind of undecided. And just kind of talking it casually there, and maybe sometimes they can. Differences between companies. Some companies will allow recruiters to kind of take that money that you needed at the beginning of the contract. So maybe the drug screening, your titers, all the shots that you had to get, credentialing, background checks, stuff like that. Some companies will allow a recruiter to take that and put it back into your extension. Not all companies, though. So don't hold that as like, I know I can get this amount. That's kind of a maybe amount. Maybe that's something that you can ask about. Be like, hey, I know I didn't have to go through a background check this time. Is there any way I can get, since you're not paying for that expenses, is there any way that we can move that over into my paycheck as well? So those are some different areas that you can ask multiple times. Again, I do usually I would probably ask twice. Once at the beginning, is there any wiggle room, and then right after the interview, like, hey, this popped up. What do you think about it? Is there anything else that we can do? And usually it flowed really casually, but don't ever take an interview and then not take the job because of pay. Now it's a little bit different if a better opportunity comes up. And that's another piece of conversation. Which will come up in some of these later episodes, but I call it playing sleazeball, where you're kind of putting recruiters against each other. It's kind of going back and forth. Like, let a recruiter know, like, hey, if something else comes up and it's a better offer, I'm still going to take it. And yeah, like, let's go for this. I'm definitely holding out for this. I know I got another offer on the table, but I'm wanting to see where this goes. Just maintain that open communication, and everything should be fine. You shouldn't be stepping on toes by doing that. And you shouldn't receive any type of guilty treatment from recruiters as well. That's something that I've always been pretty sensitive to, is getting guilt tripped. And so that was one of my big no-nos with my recruiters. And so everything's just really casual. Has never really had like one of those hardcore negotiations that I thought that before you would be able to kind of do and still have a successful travel career. But this is the way to go, asking always for more, and then always asking multiple times as well. Again, doesn't have to be 7. I don't know if I could personally think of 7 different ways to ask. I'm sure somebody out there could, to where it doesn't come off as redundant, because that could be annoying. But definitely asking like maybe twice, maybe 3 times if you can, and finding different ways to do it, and maybe turning into a little bit of a game, like being playful, things like that, making it fun for both of you. That is it for this episode, guys. Hope that you are getting some actionable information out of this, taking this to your first contract or your next contract, wherever you might be in this stage of your travel career. But if you are seeing this online, we post these on Spotify and iTunes. You can check us out on YouTube. Any subscribes, any hearts, likes, emojis, comments, all of that, reviews help more people see this in the future. So the more people that see it, the more people that we can help, which is the ultimate goal of this podcast. So thank you so much, guys. We will be talking a little bit more about contract negotiations in the upcoming episodes. So everybody have great adventures, and everybody have safe travels.